The summer wind drifts over Astoria, thick with smoke, salt, and secrets buried beneath the river's glow. An old Harbor Light diner stands alone by the water. Its sign cracked, its windows scorched, yet its glass bell still gleams like it remembers something the living forgot. Inside, a retired soldier with tired eyes and a brown and black German shepherd cleans the counter, unaware that the bell was once forged from blood meant to save lives, and that tonight it will ring again. Across the river, a light flickers, blue, then red, like a heartbeat calling from another world. The dead are silent. The faithful are listening. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles that choose ordinary souls. The morning heat settled over Astoria like a soft quilt of salt and gold. The Columbia River shimmered beneath the bridge, gulls circling above the slow, sighing water. The air smelled faintly of seaweed and diesel, and somewhere a distant bell tolled from a fishing trawler. Caleb Walker drove with the window cracked halfway, the wind brushing through the gray at his temples. He was 42, broad-shouldered, his hands scarred with the history of bridges and battles. His once black hair had faded to the color of dry cedar bark, and the short stubble on his jaw traced the map of a man who'd stopped caring about mirrors long ago. A retired U.S. Army engineer, he'd built steel crossings in deserts and jungles, only to watch too many of them crumble under shell fire. Some nights the sound of collapsing metal still found him in dreams, a reminder that even the strongest things can fail when the world decides to shake. In the passenger seat, Atlas stirred. The German shepherd, 6 years old, was a creature of calm precision, silver and tan fur gleaming under the sun, amber eyes alert but kind. A faint scar ran along his right flank, the result of a roadside rescue during Caleb's final deployment. Unlike most dogs, Atlas rarely barked without reason. He listened, to the world, to his master, to the invisible rhythm that people often missed. Caleb's truck groaned as it climbed the final bend toward the bay. The sign for Astoria. Pop. 9762 leaned slightly, its paint blistered from too many summers. Beyond it lay the waterfront, a line of old warehouses and diners, half alive and half forgotten. He hadn't planned to stop here. He hadn't planned anything really, just to keep driving until the silence in his chest began to make sense. He slowed when the smell changed, less salt, more grease, and old time. On the right stood a diner that looked as though it had given up decades ago. Harbor Light Diner, the faded letters said, though the U was half missing. The walls had once been mint green, now flaked and pale. A glass bell hung above the door, its surface cracked but clear, glinting faintly in the sunlight. Atlas shifted, ears rising, body leaning forward. Caleb felt the subtle tension in the leash, the same alertness the dog showed when something alive waited just beyond the next ridge. He parked beside a rusted gas pump. The air around the diner felt strangely still, as if the heat itself were listening. And then he saw him, an old man hunched on the steps, gray coat draped over his thin frame. His hair was snow-white, matted with sweat. His face, a network of wrinkles cut deep like riverbeds. One hand clutched the railing, the other pressed to his chest. Caleb was out of the truck before he realized it. "Sir, you all right?" The old man's voice rasped like dry leaves. "Didn't think anyone had come." Caleb crouched beside him, steady hands checking the pulse. Weak, irregular. "You need a hospital." "Hospital's 2 miles down," the man said, forcing a smile that trembled at the edges. "But I doubt I'd make it past the bridge." Atlas stood beside them, watching with quiet intensity, tail still, head tilted. The dog's eyes met Caleb's, questioning, waiting. "Let's get you inside," Caleb said. He lifted the frail man under the arms. The skin beneath the coat was cold and papery, and Caleb could feel the man's heartbeat fluttering like a trapped bird. Inside, the diner was a museum of dust. Chairs stacked on tables, a jukebox with its glass cracked, a menu board still listing blueberry pancakes, $1, $20. Yet it wasn't entirely dead. The air carried a faint trace of cinnamon, as if someone had recently stirred the ghosts of old mornings. Caleb laid the man onto a booth seat. "What's your name?" "Elias Turner," he said after catching his breath. This used to be mine. Caleb glanced around. The diner? Elias nodded. And the bell. She made it. My wife, May. She said the world forgets sounds too easily, so she wanted one that never dies. His lips twitched into a thin smile. Guess she got her wish. Caleb frowned. You live here alone? Been alone long enough to make friends with the silence. It wasn't the words, but the tone, a strange mix of resignation and peace that unsettled Caleb. He poured a glass of water from an old pitcher. Atlas sat near the doorway, nose twitching at the air, tail brushing the floor in slow arcs. Why are you here? Elias asked suddenly, eyes narrowing but not unkindly. Passing through, Caleb said. Didn't plan to stop. No one plans to stop here. Elias chuckled weakly. But sometimes the road does the planning. Outside, the river glowed copper under the noon sun. Caleb looked toward the horizon, the place where the ocean swallowed the Columbia, and wondered how many men like him had come home only to find that home no longer fit. Maybe that's why he kept driving, because stopping meant admitting he'd run out of reasons to move. Elias coughed, a deep rattle that shook his thin frame. I'll be fine, he said, though his voice betrayed him. Just a tired heart trying to remember how to beat. Caleb helped him sip water. The old man's eyes were startlingly blue, not the color of sky, but of ice, clear and old. There was kindness there, but also something else, an echo of the same tired courage Caleb saw in the mirror every morning. You built things, didn't you? Elias said suddenly. Caleb blinked. What makes you say that? Your hands. They still remember weight. You can tell a builder by the way he looks at a wall, not as an obstacle, but as a promise. Caleb didn't answer. He stared at the wall opposite, where faded photos hung. A woman, smiling, holding a pie tin. A group of fishermen raising coffee cups. The same bell above them, new and bright. Something in his chest shifted. Not pain, but a faint pull, like an old bridge settling back into place. He turned toward the door when Atlas gave a soft whine. The dog's fur bristled slightly, ears locked forward. Caleb followed his gaze. Outside, the heat shimmered over the asphalt, but no wind moved. The glass bell above the door began to tremble. Once, twice, 3 times. Each note rang clear and bright, impossibly loud in the still air. Elias's eyes flicked toward it. She's calling! Caleb's throat tightened. The wind. There is no wind, Elias said softly. When it rings, someone's been chosen. The final chime faded into silence, leaving the diner suspended in that thin space between the living and the remembered. Atlas barked once, low, deliberate, as if answering something only he could hear. Caleb stood frozen, heart pounding with the absurd certainty that the old man was right. And then, without warning, the light outside dimmed and the bell swung again. One last time, louder than before. It didn't sound like metal or glass. It sounded like recognition. Morning sunlight spilled through the diner's cracked windows like honey over dust. Caleb woke in the corner booth, the leather seat creasing against his arm, the ghost of sleep still fogging his mind. Atlas lay stretched across the tiled floor, paws twitching slightly, dreaming of something that made his tail move once, twice. The air smelled of salt and old grease, and faintly, of time. Elias Turner was already awake. The old man sat by the counter, shoulders hunched, nursing a cup of tea so weak it might as well have been water. His hair stuck up in soft white clumps, his skin thin enough that veins mapped the backs of his hands like pale rivers. When he saw Caleb stir, he smiled, a dry, knowing curve. You stayed. Caleb rubbed his temples. Didn't feel right to leave you alone last night. You collapsed. I've been collapsing for years, Elias said with a shrug. It's the body's way of reminding me I still have one. He took a sip. Coffee's cold. Stove's older than both of us. Caleb rose, joints cracking, and went behind the counter. He found an old percolator, a jar of beans, a grinder that protested like an old engine, but still worked. You don't need to be here, he said over the hum of grinding. You should rest. I am resting, Elias said. You ever met a man who could rest better than me, sitting down, talking too much? Caleb smiled despite himself. Atlas lifted his head, amber eyes following every motion of his master's hands. The dog's tail thumped once. As the coffee brewed, Caleb glanced at the shelf behind the counter. On it sat a small wooden box, its lid worn smooth. A faint label read, "Maze Light." He brushed off the dust and opened it. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a shard of pale blue glass, cloudy, curved, almost like part of a bottleneck. He turned it in his fingers. The glass shimmered faintly when the light touched it. Elias's voice came softly from behind. "That's what's left of her bell before we remade it." Caleb set it down gently. "You said last night your wife made it." The old man nodded. May could turn broken things into beauty. She was a field nurse, Vietnam, 71. She saw more blood than a butcher. After she came home, she couldn't sleep without light. So she started collecting glass from the base hospital dump. IV bottles, plasma flasks, anything that caught the sun. Caleb looked at the bell above the door, its translucent body glowing faintly in the morning. "You mean that thing's made from medical glass?" "Remelted," Elias said. "We took the shards to an old foundry outside Portland. She called it her way of giving old blood a second chance." He smiled, small and sad. "When she died, I rang it once for every man she saved. I stopped counting at 100. Caleb stood silent, the weight of those words settling on his chest like the slow tide. In the army, he'd seen medics who worked until their hands shook, men and women whose bravery never made it into medals because it was too quiet, too human. He imagined May, dark hair tied back, sleeves rolled, hands steady over a wound. He wondered what kind of woman turned horror into light. A sudden metallic sound pulled him back. Atlas's low growl. The dog was staring at the back door, tail rigid. Caleb frowned, crossed the diner, and opened it. Behind the building, sunlight bounced off the river. Nothing moved except the reeds. But the dog's fur stayed raised, his breath low, deliberate. Then Caleb heard it, faint but distinct, 3 soft notes, as though the bell had rung again. Only this time, the sound came from outside. He stepped out, boots crunching gravel. The rear wall of the diner faced the slope leading down to the water. There, half buried under wild grass, glimmered something glassy. He crouched and brushed it free, a thin sliver of pale blue, like the shard he'd seen in the box. Only this one had dried brown stains inside its curve, old and mottled. He swallowed. "Elias, what is this?" The old man had followed him, leaning on the doorframe for balance. "Leftovers," he said softly. "May used that same glass for practice. Maybe she buried the rest. Maybe she couldn't stand to throw it away." Caleb turned it over in his palm. The stain looked too deliberate, almost painted, yet the shape fit the bell perfectly, like a missing rib. "Looks like blood." Elias's gaze drifted toward the water. "Could be, but if it was," she said, blood remembered what it fought for. Inside, the percolator hissed. Atlas relaxed and trotted back, tail low, but no longer tense. Caleb placed the shard on the windowsill beside the diner door. When sunlight hit it, the air seemed to ripple, a faint blue haze washing over the tiles. Elias watched quietly. "You know, I used to think the bell was just metal and glass. Then it started ringing on its own after she died. Once, twice, sometimes 3 times. I thought I was losing my mind. Then one night, a stray dog came scratching at the door during a storm. I let it in. That was the night I stopped hearing the bell for a while." Caleb turned. "Atlas barked 3 times last night before it rang." "Maybe the bell remembers loyalty," Elias murmured. "Maybe it remembers soldiers and their dogs." The front door creaked open then, startling them both. A woman stepped in, slim, mid-30s, with skin the color of cafe au lait and dark auburn hair tied into a bun that had begun to unravel. Her uniform, khaki shirt tucked neatly into black slacks, bore the insignia of Clatsop County's Health and Safety Department. She carried a clipboard and an air of restrained authority. "Morning," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm Inspector Maribel Cruz. We got a call last night about smoke and someone collapsing here." Elias smiled wryly. "That'd be me, still alive, no thanks to time." Her eyes flicked to Caleb, assessing, military posture, grease on his forearms, exhaustion hiding behind polite composure. "You the one who called emergency?" "No, ma'am," Caleb said, "but I probably should have." Maribel's expression softened slightly. She had a steady face, High cheekbones, brown eyes that saw too much but judged little. A faint scar crossed her right wrist, the kind born from a teenage accident or a lifetime of reaching into dangerous things to fix them. "You living here?" "Just passing through," Caleb replied. She scribbled something. "Then I'll have to note this as an abandoned property under occupancy review." Atlas rose, tail brushing against the counter. Maribel's gaze lingered on the dog. "Beautiful shepherd. Purebred? Half rescue, half miracle," Caleb said. She crouched slightly, hand extended. Atlas sniffed once and licked her knuckles. Her eyes softened again, a rare warmth breaking through the professional mask. "Smart boy." Elias coughed gently. "Inspector, this place may be old, but it's not dead." Maribel stood. "Then I'll need to confirm gas, wiring, structure. If there's an active leak or fault, it's a hazard." Her words barely left her mouth when Atlas's head snapped up. His ears pricked sharply toward the back of the diner. 3 sharp barks echoed through the still air. Caleb froze, then bolted toward the kitchen. The faint hiss under the counter told him everything. He reached the main valve, turned it hard until the sound died. A beat later, the air filled with silence. Then Maribel's unsteady exhale. "Jesus," she whispered, hand over her chest. That was live gas. Caleb nodded, sweat beading his temple. "He's got a better nose than any sensor." Maribel looked at the dog again with new respect. "Then maybe keep him around." She closed her clipboard, tapping it once against her thigh. "You'll need to register occupancy and file a provisional permit if you plan to keep working here. But I'll mark this as pending, not condemned." Elias gave a small, tired grin. "You've got mercy in your paperwork, Inspector." Maribel smirked. "Don't quote me on that." She walked toward the door, sunlight outlining her figure in gold. At the threshold, she paused. "For what it's worth, Mr. Walker, it's nice seeing someone actually trying to fix something around here." When she left, the bell above the door chimed once. No wind, no movement. Caleb and Elias exchanged a glance. Atlas sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the bell. It trembled again, a soft shimmer passing through its glass body. For a moment, Caleb thought he saw light moving inside it, faint red veins glowing like old embers. Elias whispered, "That's new." Caleb stared as the glow faded. The room returned to normal, but the shard on the windowsill kept reflecting light long after the sun had shifted, as if remembering the pulse of something that wasn't entirely gone. By noon, the heat had turned heavy and bright, pressing against the diner's windows like a hand that wouldn't let go. The Columbia shimmered silver just beyond the highway, and the sky hung still, too blue, too wide, as though daring the earth to breathe first. Inside, Caleb Walker wiped sweat from his neck, the smell of polish and lemon oil lingering as he scrubbed decades of dust from the Harbor Lights counter. His shirt clung to his shoulders, sleeves rolled to his elbows, exposing arms marked with pale scars, reminders of bridge cables and shrapnel. Each scratch told a story that no one asked to hear, but the quiet work steadied him. It was the first rhythm that had made sense in months. Elias Turner sat in his usual booth, watching the veteran with a kind of quiet pride. The old man's breathing was steadier today, though his hands still trembled slightly when he lifted his cup. "You ever think," Elias said, "maybe the place needed someone broken enough to understand it?" Caleb chuckled. "I'm not broken, just a little out of practice at belonging anywhere." Elias nodded toward Atlas, who lay near the door, head on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. "Your dog seems to disagree. He looks like he's already claimed the place." Atlas thumped his tail once against the tile, as if confirming it. The conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock. Caleb turned to see a young man at the doorway, tall and wiry, maybe 25, dressed in a delivery uniform damp with sweat. His name tag read Jesse Ford. He had sandy hair curling under his cap and freckles that cut through a light tan. His posture carried that restless confidence found only in people who hadn't yet been disappointed too many times. "Got a shipment for Turner," Jesse said, holding up a crate of canned goods. "Town Co-op's been trying to get rid of old stock. Figured you might need it." Elias blinked. "You hauled this all the way here in this heat?" "Didn't want it rotting in the storeroom." Jesse grinned, easy and genuine. "Besides, Mom says you used to give her free pie slices when she was a kid." That explains your good manners, Elias said, smiling. Set it on the counter, son. Caleb helped unload the crate. Inside were cans of peaches, beans, and flour sacks tied with twine. Jesse looked around the diner with the curiosity of someone peeking into a memory older than himself. Didn't think this place would ever wake up again, he said. It was like frozen in stories. Still thawing? Caleb replied. Before leaving, Jesse gave a quick salute to Atlas. The shepherd blinked, then gave a quiet woof of approval. After the door closed, Elias said, That boy's mother used to work here. May taught her to bake lemon glazed pies. Said everyone had to taste like sunlight. Caleb paused. You mentioned that before. Lemon glaze. What made it so special? Elias's eyes softened. It wasn't the recipe. It was what she whispered while stirring. She'd hum this old hymn under her breath, and every time the batter rose, she said it was the sound of Grace still breathing. Caleb looked toward the kitchen door, half open. You still remember it? I remember the song, Elias said. Not the words. Maybe the diner remembers the rest. He leaned back, fatigue beginning to win. Caleb guided him toward the booth's corner, spreading a blanket over his knees. The old man's gratitude was silent but deep. A nod, a flicker of the lips. The afternoon drifted by. Caleb fixed the flickering lights above the counter, then tested the coffee maker, which groaned but finally sighed out a dark, fragrant stream. When the first bitter scent filled the air, Atlas perked up, ears twitching. Caleb smiled. Smells like civilization, huh? That was when the bell rang. Once, he froze. The air was still, the doors hadn't moved. Then, a second ring, clearer, higher, echoing faintly like laughter remembered. Elias stirred from his nap, but didn't wake. Atlas stood and padded to the doorway, head tilted. A shadow crossed the threshold. A woman. She was in her late 20s, slender and sunburned, with pale skin touched by freckles across the bridge of her nose. Her chestnut brown hair was tied into a loose braid that fell over one shoulder. She wore a faded denim dress and carried a satchel embroidered with yellow daisies. Her steps were hesitant, almost reverent, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. Sorry, she said softly. Is this place open? Caleb blinked, wiping his hands on a towel. Not officially, but you can come in. The woman smiled, tired but warm. I saw the bell move. My dad used to tell me about this place, said it had a sound that could wake memories. Elias's eyes opened at that. Your father? Yes, she said, stepping closer. Harold Haynes. He worked here when he was 17, used to call it his first home. The name landed like a soft hammer between them. Elias's lips parted. Harold, he murmured, the boy who burned toast faster than he could butter it. He chuckled faintly. He had a kind heart. Always wanted to open his own diner. The woman's eyes glistened. He did, for a while, before the flood took it. He never really cooked again after that. Caleb gestured for her to sit. I'm Caleb. This is Elias. And the dog who thinks he owns the place is Atlas. She smiled at the shepherd, who trotted closer and pressed his nose against her hand. You're beautiful, she whispered, running her fingers through his fur. You look like my father's dog. He had one just like you, same eyes. He said they always knew when people were sad. Atlas wagged once, as though he understood. Caleb poured her a cup of coffee. The woman accepted it with both hands, eyes wandering the room, the faded photos, the worn counter, the glow from the blue shard on the window. It's strange, she said. I've never been here before, but it smells like something I remember. Butter and lemons. Elias looked down at his trembling hands. May used to say butter smells like memory. Maybe that's what you're catching. The woman smiled through the shimmer in her eyes. Dad said the same thing. For a long time, no one spoke. The only sounds were the hum of an old refrigerator and the steady pulse of the river outside. The sunlight shifted across the floor, painting the tiles gold. Then, Atlas stiffened. He turned toward the window, fur rising slightly. The shard of glass on the sill began to glow again. Faintly red at first, then a muted gold. The bell above the door swayed, giving off 3 delicate chimes that resonated in the air long after they should have faded. The woman closed her eyes, tears slipping free. That sound, she whispered. That's him saying thank you. Elias's throat tightened. Maybe it's him remembering too. Caleb watched as the light around the shard slowly dimmed, the glow sinking back into the glass, like breath retreating into lungs. Atlas exhaled, relaxed, and lay down at the woman's feet. The diner felt full, not of people, but of presence. When the woman finally stood to leave, she pulled a folded piece of paper from her satchel and laid it on the counter. "For your wall," she said. After she was gone, Caleb unfolded it. Written in looping handwriting were the words, "Butter smells like memory, and memory makes us return." Elias stared at it a long time. "That's her father's writing," he said softly. "He must have written it before he died." Caleb pinned it beside the register. The sunlight caught the ink, making it glow faintly gold. Atlas yawned, curling beneath it, tail brushing against the floor. Outside, the wind picked up for the first time all day, stirring the bell just once. A clear, perfect note. But as Caleb turned to close for the evening, he froze. On the counter, near the crate of supplies, lay another note that hadn't been there before, a small scrap of parchment, browned with age, written in the same looping hand. It read, "When the third light glows, follow the river." Caleb looked toward the door, heart thudding. The sun had nearly set, and across the water, something shimmered, a distant flicker of blue and red, pulsing just beyond the trees. Atlas lifted his head, ears pricking, low growl vibrating in his chest. Elias whispered, "May's light." The bell rang twice, sharp, insistent, then silence. Evening fell over Astoria like a slow, molten tide. The Columbia River caught the last of the sun, turning red and gold before dissolving into smoke-gray dusk. The diner's neon sign flickered half alive, humming faintly, as if struggling to remember its own name. Inside, the air smelled of brewed coffee and rain-soaked wood. Caleb Walker sat by the counter, elbows on the surface, reading the strange note he'd found again. "When the third light glows, follow the river." He had read it a dozen times, yet it still carried the same quiet electricity. A whisper meant for him alone. Atlas lay stretched across the doorway, chin on his paws, eyes open and watchful. The dog's ears flicked at every small sound. The tick of the ceiling fan, the hum of the refrigerator, the breath of a summer wind sneaking through a cracked window. Outside, the horizon burned faintly, not with sunset now, but with something else. Smoke. Elias Turner emerged from the kitchen, leaning on his cane. He wore a wool vest despite the heat, his frame thinner than ever, but his eyes were bright, alert. "You smell that?" he asked. "Smoke from the west," Caleb said. "Could be a brush fire." Elias frowned, moving closer to the window. "No, that's upstream smoke, forest side. If it's coming this fast, it'll reach the lower bank by midnight." Before Caleb could reply, headlights swept across the front glass. A truck rumbled to a stop outside, engine coughing dust. From it climbed a man whose presence seemed to drag the air down with weight. Grant Pike, mid-50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a jaw carved sharp enough to cut conversation short. His dark hair was slicked back, streaked with silver at the temples, and his suit jacket looked out of place amid the river dust. Grant had the practiced grace of someone who'd learned to command rooms, or bulldoze them. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "Evening," he said, voice smooth but cold. "You must be the new tenant." His eyes flicked over Caleb, then to Elias, then stopped briefly at Atlas. The dog stood, tail stiff, gaze fixed, silent warning in the air. Caleb met the man's stare calmly. "You're standing on private property." "Actually," Grant said, pulling a folded document from his coat, "you're standing on the edge of a county redevelopment zone. I'm spearheading the harbor expansion project. Luxury dock, resort, the works. The diner happens to sit right where we plan to put the access road." Elias's face hardened. "You again," he muttered. Grant turned slightly. "Hello, old man. Still pretending this place has life left?" Caleb's tone was even. "You know each other?" Elias nodded. "He used to wash dishes here back in '85. Said one day he'd buy the river. Guess he's trying." Grant smiled faintly, ignoring the sting. "I learned something from this place. Sentiment doesn't pay bills. Progress does." He slid the paper onto the counter. "If this building isn't up to code in 30 days, it reverts to the township. Once that happens, it's mine. Caleb unfolded the document, scanning quickly. Legal jargon, clauses, inspection deadlines. You really came all this way to hand this in person? Grant smirked. I wanted to see who was crazy enough to try resurrecting ghosts. Before Caleb could respond, the bell over the door chimed twice, sharp, sudden. All three turned. Maribel Cruz stood there, clipboard in hand, hair slightly wind-tossed, cheeks flushed from rushing. She wore a thin gray jacket and work pants, the kind worn by someone who never stopped moving. "Mr. Pike," she said coolly, "still waving papers instead of empathy?" Grant's smile tightened. "Inspector Cruz, always a pleasure." "Save it," she said, stepping inside. "I got your notice from City Hall. Legally, it's valid. Morally, it's garbage." Caleb blinked, half amused at her bluntness. Elias chuckled softly. Atlas's tail thumped once. Grant turned to leave, but not before saying, "Enjoy your coffee while you can. Progress has a deadline." Then he was gone, leaving the sound of his engine fading down the hill. For a moment, silence filled the diner, heavy but alive. Maribel exhaled, setting her clipboard down. "He's been pushing this project for a year. Half the town thinks it'll save jobs. The other half knows it'll drown the bay in concrete." Elias sank into a chair. "He's drowning memories first." Caleb looked at the paper again. 30 days. That's not long." Maribel leaned on the counter. "Then you better work fast." She stayed to help them inspect wiring and vents, her hands moving with professional precision. Atlas followed her, sniffing tools and occasionally nudging her elbow for attention. She laughed once, a sound that seemed foreign to her own lips. "He's nosier than my last partner." Caleb arched a brow. "You had a partner?" Her expression faltered, but she nodded. "Fire marshal. We worked together 3 years. Died in an explosion at the port. I stayed. Someone had to keep the city honest." Caleb said nothing, but something in his eyes softened, a shared language between survivors. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of burning pine. Elias stood suddenly, gripping the edge of the counter. "We can't just sit here. If that fire crosses the western ridge, the town will lose power." Maribel checked her phone. "Power's already flickering at the substation. They'll cut the grid if the wind changes." Caleb's mind moved fast. "If that happens, this'll be one of the only buildings near the river with gas stoves. We can turn it into a refuge." Elias grinned weakly. "A diner's good for feeding people. Always has been." By sunset, the air had grown heavy, filled with the smell of ash. Orange light smeared across the river, reflecting the advancing smoke. Caleb and Maribel carried out sandbags, sealing the lower doors. Atlas followed each command faithfully, his paws leaving wet prints on the tile. When night fell, the fire appeared like a slow storm of embers crawling down the distant hills. By 9, the power failed. The diner's lights flickered once, then died, leaving only the glow of lanterns. Within the hour, the first knock came. A fisherman in a yellow slicker, eyes wide, voice shaking. "They said this place still had light." Caleb let him in. Then came a young mother and her child, soaked from the riverbank. Then 2 teenagers from the bakery. Before long, a dozen people huddled inside, shivering despite the heat outside. Maribel organized them efficiently. Blankets in the corner, water near the counter. Elias brewed coffee on the old gas range, the smell rich and grounding. The diner became something sacred. Laughter breaking through fear, steam fogging the windows, the bell over the door ringing softly each time another soul found safety. At midnight, the sky outside turned red, not sunset, but reflection. The fire had reached the far ridge. Sparks drifted like stars over the river. Everyone stood silent at the window, and then it happened. The glass bell above the door began to glow, the same faint red as the horizon, pulsing with the rhythm of breath. Atlas stood, fur bristling, ears forward. 3 sharp barks broke the hush. Caleb looked up just in time to see a streak of blue light cut across the river, bright, unnatural, like lightning turned slow. It struck the water near the opposite bank, sending ripples of eerie color through the current. The glow from the bell intensified, echoing the pulse. Maribel's eyes widened. "What is that?" Elias whispered, voice trembling. "May's light." The bell rang once, twice, then a third time, long and low, vibrating through the floor. The air inside the diner shifted, warm to cool, like the breath before a storm breaks. Caleb stepped outside, Atlas at his side. Across the river, the blue glow danced over the waves, forming what looked almost like a shape, a silhouette standing in the firelight. Then, just as suddenly, the glow collapsed into the dark. The bell stopped ringing. The river went still. Caleb turned to Maribel, who had followed him out, face pale. "Did you see that?" She nodded slowly. "I think something just answered your bell." Behind them, Elias's voice cracked softly through the quiet. "And it knows your name, son." Morning rose on Astoria through the haze of smoke and dew. The fire had passed in the night, leaving the hills blackened and the river streaked with drifting ash. But the diner still stood, weathered, scorched around the eaves, yet alive. The harbor light sign buzzed faintly, flickering its pale blue glow like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Inside, Caleb Walker brewed coffee on the gas stove, sleeves rolled high, hands moving with steady purpose. His eyes were ringed with fatigue but bright, as if something had lit inside him during the night's chaos. Atlas lay at his feet, fur damp from river spray, still breathing in short bursts from exhaustion. Around them, the townsfolk who'd taken shelter slept huddled under blankets. Fishermen, a young mother, 2 teens from the bakery. The air smelled of burnt wood, coffee, and survival. Elias Turner sat by the window, wrapped in a wool shawl, watching the fog curl over the river. His face was pale, lined deeper by the night's strain, but there was peace in his eyes. "You see that?" he said softly as Caleb approached. "The water's still moving east. No matter what burns, it keeps going." Caleb nodded, pouring him a cup. "Guess it remembers where to go." Elias smiled faintly. The river always remembers, same with people, if they let themselves. Before either could say more, the bell above the door rang once, gentle, deliberate. Maribel Cruz stepped inside, her jacket streaked with soot, her hair tied back loosely. Her brown eyes were sharp with fatigue, but calm with resolve. "The fire's contained," she said. "Crews from Portland came in before dawn. Half the ridge is gone, but no one was hurt." Atlas stood and padded to her side, tail low, but wagging once in quiet greeting. She bent down to scratch his head. "You kept them safe, huh? Smart boy?" Her voice cracked a little on the last words, and Caleb caught it. The tremor of someone who'd spent too many nights in disaster zones, pretending not to feel. "Coffee?" he asked simply. "Please," she said, sitting. "You run this place now?" He gave a small smile. "I guess last night made it official." The door creaked open again. Grant Pike entered, the man who had come with documents and arrogance the day before, but now his tailored suit was smudged with ash, his tie gone, his hair wet and clinging to his temples. He looked less like a businessman and more like a man who had stood too close to the fire and realized it didn't care who he was. Elias watched him approach. "You here to take what's left?" Grant's voice was rougher than usual. "No, I came to return something." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter sealed with old wax. "I found this near the pier. It's addressed to you." Elias opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a note written in looping cursive, familiar, unmistakable, May Turner. The words were faded but legible. "If the bell rings 3 times without wind, follow the river. The light you see isn't death. It's the promise that what we love outlives us." Elias's breath caught. She left this all those years ago. Grant looked uneasy, shifting his weight. "I thought it was a trick of the light last night, that blue glow, but when I went back down, I saw something else, a reflection on the water, like a figure standing there." His eyes flicked toward Caleb. "It looked at me, not at the fire, at me, and for a second, I thought it forgave me." Maribel watched him, expression unreadable. Maybe it did. Grant met her gaze, something raw behind his tired eyes. "I built my life on forgetting places like this. Maybe that was my mistake." He turned toward Caleb, reaching into his pocket. "Here, the council contract, torn. You keep this diner, officially. I'll tell them it's a community site." Caleb hesitated. "Why?" "Because I saw what it became last night," Grant said, "a place that stayed lit when the rest of the town went dark." He looked at Elias again. "I think that's worth more than a road." Elias gave a weak laugh, half gratitude, half disbelief. You grew a heart overnight. Don't tell anyone, Grant said, managing a wry smile before leaving through the door, the bell ringing softly behind him. Silence followed, deep and steady. Caleb folded the letter back carefully and placed it beside the bell. Outside, dawn brightened the horizon, faint gold meeting the gray water. By mid-morning, the townsfolk awoke, murmuring thanks before heading home. The young mother hugged Elias, the fisherman shook Caleb's hand, and the teenagers promised to return and repaint the diner's sign. When the last of them left, the place felt different, not empty, but waiting. Maribel gathered her things. The department will send inspectors in a few days, she said, glancing around. But don't change too much. The cracks give it character. Caleb smiled. Cracks let the light in, right? She paused at the door, the sunlight hitting her hair, making it glow copper. You ever think about staying here for good? He looked past her to the river, where the water caught light like a long silver scar. Maybe I already did. Maribel's lips curved into a small smile. Then I guess I'll have to come back for coffee, and maybe a piece of that lemon pie you keep promising. Elias chuckled softly. If the boy ever learns the recipe. When she was gone, the diner felt both full and quiet, the kind of quiet that hummed, alive. Caleb stood by the door, hand brushing the bell. The glass was cool under his fingers, and for a moment he thought he saw faint veins of color deep within it, red, blue, and gold intertwining like light through stained glass. Elias spoke from his booth, voice faint. May used to say, light's just love that never figured out how to stop traveling. Caleb turned. You should rest. The old man smiled softly. I think I will. Don't wake me for the lunch crowd. He leaned back, eyes closing, breath slowing. The sunlight pooled across his face, gentle as a benediction. Caleb watched him for a long time, the weight of quiet pressing in. Then the bell above the door chimed 3 times, slow and even, though no wind moved. Atlas lifted his head and gave a soft whine. Caleb's throat tightened. Rest easy, old man, he whispered. The bell stilled. The diner glowed faintly, as if the morning had found its center there. Later that afternoon, Caleb stood on the riverbank, Elias's hat in his hand, the water lapping softly at the stones. Atlas stood beside him, tail still, gaze fixed on the current. Across the river, the faintest glimmer of blue rose and sank again, quiet, patient, eternal. He smiled. We found it, didn't we, boy? The light she left behind. Atlas barked once, the sound echoing over the water. Caleb placed the hat on a drifting plank and pushed it gently out. It floated downstream, carried east by the same current Elias had watched that morning. Behind them, the Harbor Light Diner stood against the fading sky, paint chipped, sign crooked, but windows bright with reflected sun. The bell above the door rang once more, clear and true, its sound carrying across the river like a farewell. And somewhere beneath the rippling light, it seemed that the river answered. Sometimes God doesn't send thunder to shake the world. He sends a small bell, a sound that reminds us that love, even when buried under years of ash and sorrow, can still ring true. The miracle isn't that the diner survived the fire, or that the river kept flowing. It's that hearts once hardened by grief began to soften again. Maybe that's how heaven works, quietly, through people who choose to stay when walking away would be easier. So, if you've ever felt lost, if your light has dimmed, remember, God's grace is often disguised as an ordinary morning, a stranger's kindness, or a dog who refuses to leave your side. The bell still rings for those who listen. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that miracles still happen. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and let the light of faith travel farther. May God bless you, keep your home warm, your heart steady, and may your own bell never stop ringing.